Glad to see you out there, because I know my heart goes out to so many people I saw on Facebook, just friend after friend, and I'm like, not a good time to leave. I've got a chainsaw. I know how to use it, but I got to get going. And I thank you for praying for me and my family. As Greg said, we're going to take off right after church today, so probably won't be really in a big-time visiting mode because we want to get to Estevan, Saskatchewan this evening and on our way. But thank you for praying for my mom. I got to talk to her Saturday evening, and my sister updated me this morning that she actually had some rest in the hospital last night, which was good. Because I don't know if you've been in the hospital, it's not a place of rest. It's unbelievable how you don't get any rest in there. And we've been there and done that for 19 days of ICU where I'm like, can you just let her sleep? No, we got to keep checking her. Okay. That was my wife, by the way. Anyways, great to talk to Mom. She said this, I think she might have someone else in her room, and it was a lady, and she said, yeah, with her oxygen mask on, rolled over, and I said to her, I know where I've been, or I know where I came from, I know where I've been, and I know where I'm going. And the other lady said, amen, sister. And so my mom's testimony in that, she's ready to meet the Lord, and I support her in that. And that's not where the fear is. There's a bit of fear in the process and maybe getting there, right? But anyway, we're going sooner. And just so you know, if thank you, Mark, Pastor Mark, Elder Mark, whatever. You can be pastor next week. You can play pastor. I don't care. Anyway, the week after, if we still need more time, the elders have graciously said, just work from up there, take some vacation, whatever. But if you want to work from up there, because, okay, maybe it's going to be imminent, things might happen, I'll take all my gear with me, and maybe in 2 weeks we'll pipe in. Right, Morgan? You didn't even know that yet. But he's got thumbs up. So I always wanted to be on the big screen. So we'll see what happens. We might need a little practicing beforehand, but anyway, I'm happy to do that because, we will have the time up there. I'll make the time. Now, when I go home to Canada, there's not a waking moment. I'm not visiting with somebody, but I'll control myself and do my work if that comes to that. So we have a plan there, a little bit of a contingency plan. So, all right, but thank you so much for your cares and concerns and boy, I'm enjoying that texting app because I can just, there are 56 or 57 of you on it, so that's a good chunk of people. A lot of them not even here, but are in communications that way. And you got a prayer request, shoot it into that number, and bam, we'll get it out to everybody and get people praying for you. And so we're excited about that. All right, let's get to work. So, this fellow, this is my preliminary thing, and I had prepared this already before we even decided we were going to leave today. But this is, I'm going to talk about baseball. What a change, right? This is Clayton Kershaw. Does anybody know who he is? Any baseball fans out there? We got one. John, I'll forgive you for being a baseball fan. Anyway, no. I like baseball too. LA Dodgers pitcher, and this is a picture I found. They had a Pride Night a few weeks ago. Not Pride in baseball, but, they have these things, hockey players, a lot of hockey teams have said, we're not doing it anymore. They'd put the colored tape on their stick during warm-up and this, that, and the other thing, and it's not happening with a lot of NHL teams, which is great. But anyway, Clayton's got his hat on for whether it's warm-up or whatever, and you know what he did? He wrote a Bible verse on it. Genesis 9:12-16. We just read that last week as God's promise of what? I have set my rainbow in the clouds. And I was like, dude, score. That he's going to set the record straight. You're not stealing God's rainbow. And now I haven't even looked at it because I don't even care to, but maybe there's one color that's not in the regular rainbow. Whatever. You still think of the rainbow when they have hijacked that and hijacked it for pride and sin. And yeah, I'm calling it that. It's on record. But I'm thankful for men like this that are willing to stand up and just say, hey, there's the truth right there on my hat. Go look it up. So I thought I was pretty excited about that. All right, so this week, let's go back. Get a little too excited here. All right, it's easier with the mouse. Let's just do this. There, look how fast that goes. Okay, right there. So we're talking about the perfect substitute this week, and we'll get into our verses a bit here. But remember, God does everything right, so that's why we can say it's the perfect substitute that we're going to cover today with Abraham and Isaac, of course. But first, let's go back and remember we're building our foundation here, and like I've said before, we're in that Redeemer section. We're going to be here for a long time because that's most of the Old Testament, obviously, up until when Christ comes. But let's do a little quick review. We're going to talk about some characters and players, and then we're going to talk about what God's action was with them, and then we're going to see what that result is or the outcome of that. And so first of all here, we saw last weekend man had become what? Exceedingly sinful, like every thought and inclination of his heart. It's good to look at language. You know what that means? Everything. They did not think of God ever, but only of themselves. And we're like, kind of sounds familiar. Nowadays, what's God's action? He's going to blot them out. Again, the language of that is get rid of. Get rid of them. And, not a good thing. And the outcome is not so good for them. It's actually terrible. It's good to think about that on occasion, right? Well, then you have another character, and that's Noah the believer, who believed God, and God considered him righteous because of that. Now, it wasn't what he did, that was the outcome of his belief. But he believed God, and God honors that faith and considers you righteous in that. Now, it's going to be fixed on something, that faith, and it is what he says, right? So God considered him righteous because of his faith, and God was willing then to save him. All right? So then you have Noah as the builder, and we talked a bit about that last week. How did he figure out how to do all that stuff? Well, he had some help because God directed him. I believe it without a shadow of a doubt that God was very involved. I think God had to do the engineering and the architecture and do this, do that. Noah's an intelligent guy. He had workers helping him, I'm sure, but God directed them. And what was the outcome of that? An approved vessel to avoid the coming destruction. Has to be done God's way. It cannot be done any other way. His way only. It is his way or the highway. I like to think I can say that, but I really can't, and I shouldn't. But God is allowed to say that. He has the right to say that. Okay, how about the family of believers? Because they believed what God said, they acted accordingly and were allowed entry into the boat. You could stand outside all you wanted and say how you believed, but your belief is going to cause an action, right? So they were given entry and they were spared as well. How about the unbelievers? No, they were shut out. That's a theme, a reoccurring thing. You don't believe what God says, the word out follows closely behind. Adam and Eve didn't believe what God had said, ate the fruit, and where did they end up? Out. outside the garden. Cain, is he any different from his brother Abel? No, but didn't believe God, and he's put away. He's out. Same in this case too. You're shut out, lost forever. Serious stuff, folks. We have to look at that. Okay? But for those that did believe, they were shut in. I love the contrast. It's so simple, but it's so profound because God shut that door and I believe sealed it. No water's getting in. So what does that talk about? It's secure. Always secure when you believe what God says. It's security. Now, they hadn't seen any rain yet. They hadn't seen anything. God says, time to get in. We believe you. Step in. God shuts the door. I don't know what they heard from the inside, but I'm like, they were secure, nice and dry. Okay? Also, because they believed God and went in and he shut them in there, he also provided redemption. He opened the door again. And what did they come out to? New life. It was a brand new beginning. Some things changed. Yep. That's where we're going to pick it up today, but it's an opening to new life because when you believe God and act upon it, the benefit is new life. All right. Okay, so we've got some verses to read, and I got some volunteers out there. I was kind of like, should I just read them? No, I'm not going to just read them. So, I think we're going to the back over there first, right to the back. Tanner's down there, so he's going to read Genesis 11, 8 to 9 for us.
So the Lord dispersed them from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. Therefore its name was called Babel, because the Lord confused the language of all the earth. And from there the Lord dispersed them over the face of all the earth.
Okay, and then we have Genesis 12, 1 to 4.
Now the Lord said to Abraham, go to your country and your kindred and your father's house in the land that I will show you. And you will make a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in your families in the earth shall be blessed. So Abraham went as the Lord had told him. And Lot went with him. Abraham was 75 years old when he departed from Haran.
Thank you. And Genesis 21, 1 to 3.
The Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did to Sarah as he had promised. And Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the time of which God had spoken to him. Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore him, Isaac.
Okay, then Genesis 22, 1 to 3. Boy, I'm making Scott run today, so.
After these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham? And he said, here I am. He said, take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. So Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey and took two of his young men with him and his son Isaac. And he cut the wood for the burnt offering and arose and went to the place of which God had told him.
Okay, and then 22, 4 through 9. Mrs. Wall is going to read it.
On the third day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. Then Abram said to his young man, stay here with the donkey. I and the boy will go over there and worship and come again to you. And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son. And he took in his hand the fire and the knife. So they went, both of them, together. And Isaac said to his father, "My father." And he said, "Here I am, my son." He said, "Behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham said, "God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son." So they went, both of them together. When they came to the place of which God had told him, Abraham built the altar there and laid the wood in order and bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar on top of the wood.
And then 22:10-13.
Then Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife to slaughter his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, "Abraham, Abraham." And he said, "Here I am." He said, "Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him, for now I know you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him was a ram, caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we're going to go through now, after reading those verses, we're going to do a brief overview of the Tower of Babel. Now, we could spend a whole Sunday on Tower of Babel, but it's just going to be touching it and moving on at this point. Okay, then we're going to see that God chose Abram, and then obviously changes to Abraham during the story. God fulfills the promise of a son. God tests Abraham. Ooh, that kind of made me squirm a little bit. Abraham believes God, and then God provides the ram. And we're going to end on why this story should be important to you. Okay, let's go back to Genesis. It'll be in 11 there when we'll read those verses here. But a couple of things first is God still wanted man to fill the earth with population, to go out and be fruitful and multiply. He repeated that command, first of all, that was in Genesis 1:28, repeats to Noah and his sons again in 9:7. God wanted them to fill the earth, right? That was a command. That's part of why he created them. And don't ever let anybody tell you this whole earth that we're overpopulated. That is not true. This earth can handle a lot more people, okay? But man expressed pride towards God again. In 11:4, it says this, "All right, then they said, 'Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves and not be scattered over the face of the earth.'" So they express pride in themselves again. They're not looking to God. No, they're looking to themselves. And folks, this is so happening today again, right? That God needs to intervene again with man. So God does intervene in verses 8 and 9 there. "So the Lord scattered them from there all over the earth, and they stopped building the city." That is why the place is called Babel, because here the Lord confused the language of the whole world. From there, the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole earth. All right. So God says nothing will be impossible for them. Now, I kind of like this passage because it talks about linguistics. Go figure, right? This is the confusing of languages, which only God could do, which only He could intervene and make it so drastic that they can't even communicate with each other anymore. Now I could get up here and speak in Sanayohiwa for you, but is that going to be a problem? Well, yeah, because you won't understand me. Sometimes you don't understand me and I'm speaking English. That's sometimes happens. But nothing would be impossible for them. Did you know that the unity of man contributes to the advancement of man? I say advancement. So what's your international language for flight? English, everywhere you go. Why? Because you're going to have problems if you can't communicate in the air when you're trying to land. And yeah. But even further than that, English is a very major language in the world, and it's unifying the globe. That should cause us concern, and it does fall into end time stuff a bit. Do you know the only language group in the world that's kind of going the opposite direction of English is? It's Hebrew. They're the only successful language to revitalize themselves on the globe. I've studied this stuff. It's amazing. Everybody wants to learn English because it contributes to the unity of man. Whereas the Hebrew language, nope, if you immigrate to Israel, you're in Hebrew classes pretty much the next day. Anyway, you can get me going on all kinds of tangents with that, but anyway. So God says nothing will be impossible. And look, we've put somebody on the moon. Now, some people are saying that didn't happen. I saw it on TV as a 4-year-old, so I know it happened. But anyway, all right. But in his mercy, remember, mercy's not giving them what they deserve. He doesn't kill them. Why? He's faithful to his promises. Again, he's not going to wipe man out because he has a promise to fulfill, the Redeemer. But he does judge them and punish them in the midst of that, okay? In his grace, he confuses their languages. That's God's grace again. Doesn't that baffle you? It just baffles my mind that his punishment is really an expression of his grace. Because if he does not confuse their languages, do you think their pride's going to subside at some time? No. There will be no chance. Because that's the direction man goes, is pride and stiff-arming towards God. Now, notice I put /culture. You can't have another language without culture changing to go with it. That's why when people learn English and they come to America, they get really frustrated. Why? Because they don't know our culture. Now, we knew this going into tribal culture, so we learned them together. I spoke like a little baby, and I learned very simple cultural things to go along. And as I grew in my ability in the language, I grew in my understanding of the culture. And boy, by the time I was fluent in the language and got into their worldview, it was unbelievable how things came together to understand who they were. You need culture. So not only could they not understand each other, I believe they couldn't understand why those other people were doing what they were doing. Because culture and language goes hand in hand. Couldn't figure it out. And boy, I'll tell you, things change from place to place. That's why Canada has a lot of problems, because they have bilingualism. No. Well, we're trying to push it down here, except you don't have to learn English anymore. Well, that's not going to contribute to national unity. Sorry, did I just say that out loud? Yes, I did. All right. So in his grace, then, he disperses them. God's grace in doing that. Now, it put a big monkey wrench in things for several thousand years, because only in the last few hundred years have we really made, well, not even few hundred, 200, have we made progress to reaching those language groups with the message of the Redeemer. That's why it's so important. Okay? Now, a lot of languages are disappearing. I understand that. But it's complicated. It's hard work to get the gospel to a lot of different languages. So we're still suffering this, or going through this, but God's in control. He did it, so let's get in step with him and make it happen. All right, so just quickly on this. Boy, I said it was just quickly, and it's taken me forever because I just get all goo-ga over language stuff. That's why. Did you know as they dispersed from there, I don't know if anybody's ever showed you this before, but the first group of Noah's descendants is Shem, Ham, and Japheth, right? The people that were of Shem are your Middle Eastern people and what goes to the east. So into India, China, and the migration we know that took place across the Bering Straits into North America and down to South America. They're all kind of brown-colored people. And people in Mongolia have birthmarks similar to people in South America. Did you know that? And linguistically, there are family groups of language. I'm not going to get all techie on you here, but it's kind of similar. I mean, you can trace patterns. So that's Shem. Ham moved down into Africa, and you have your African lineages down in there. And then white-skinned, sunburned type people moved up to Northern Europe in here. Japheth. Linguistically, it's amazing to research this stuff. So God spread them out, and because he said, go into all the earth. He said, be fruitful and multiply. Get out there. So he intervenes and spreads them out. That was a brief overview. Yeah, right. Anyway, God chose Abraham. So God had not forgotten the plan. And over in Genesis 12:1, the Lord said to Abram, leave your house, leave your country and your people and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. His plan required major changes. Oftentimes it does. And this means leaving your country and your family. Now, folks, we struggle with that here. Don't kid yourself, leaving our families, that type of thing. But you go back in history, it was even harder to do because nowadays we can travel at liberty pretty much. Back in this day, you leave your family net, you're most likely going to face death. Okay? It's good to think about that. But God said you need to leave. Okay? His plan required faith and trust. He didn't know where he was going. That's not what God wanted him to understand. The place I will show you. Okay? That's faith and trust. Okay? Adam did respond in faith. Oops, excuse my S on there, but did respond in faith, and this was considered righteousness. Who was righteous last week? Noah. Found grace, favor in the eyes of God because he believed God and what he said. And the same is with Abraham. We know this from the New Testament telling us that. All right. God made several promises to Abraham in verses 12 to 3. In chapter 12, verses 2 and 3. I will make you into a great nation and bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you. I will curse those, that curse you. And all peoples of the earth will be blessed through you. When God makes a promise, does he deliver? Absolutely. Okay? God would make him into a great nation. It's like, you know, God, it's us two old people right here, right? You know? Okay? God would make his name great. God would care for him and his descendants, because if anybody comes against your descendants, they will be cursed. Anybody blesses your descendants, they will be blessed. Gee, have we seen that play out lately in the last 70 years? Oh, yeah. Absolutely. And I'm not in control of what any buttons or what was dropped in the last 24 hours, but you know what? It might feel a little bit like a curse in Iran right now when 6 bunker bombs have been dropped on you. Those things just penetrate down and keep blowing up. Ay. Is God's word true? I'm not saying I can manipulate anything. No, God's in control of things. And he does what he says. And I'll bless all nations through him, which is what? That is a direct tie to the Redeemer. So God just finished scattering people to the ends of the earth. Now he's going to bless all nations through you, Abram at this time. Okay? Excuse me. All right, so back to our map there. The Ur of Chaldees is right in over where basically around the border of Iraq and Iran right now. And that's where he started out. So he's going to move from there, as I blew up that little spot there, from the Persian Gulf there, and he's going to move over to Canaan. Now he takes this big arc, kind of a trip over that direction. Oh, that's not very far. That's less than 1,000 miles. Okay, did anybody walk to town yesterday because your vehicle didn't work to go find out there are no supply? Walmart wasn't even open. How long would it take you? It would take us, we're 8 miles from the Walmart parking lot. If I had to walk down there, I wouldn't look like this, for one thing, because I couldn't even buy enough food to look like this, but I could get something to go home with. And folks, I know the power was off, and I want you to know I'm empathetic and everything like that. But we're pretty spoiled, right? And this guy's going to move basically to the other side of the earth in perspective, okay? But what does he do? Believes God. All right, so Abraham believes God in verse 4 there. And he says, oops, I flipped over one page too far. Okay, so Abraham left as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. And Abraham was 75 years old. Now, I'm not quite that old yet, but boy, if I had to walk that far. When he set out from Haran, 75 years old. And his wife's pretty much the same age. Come on, honey, let's pack up and go. Are you out of your tree? Well, they didn't even have trees there, but anyway, you out of your sandbags or what? Just, no. God said, let go. Now, I'm sure he's in a lot better shape than me in those days because they just were tougher. Anyway, he believed God and then what? Took action. He leaves. Did his leaving save him? No. His trust in God. But it always has a result. It always has some, if you want to call it evidence, a result, an action that comes from it. And he took close family with him, so his son Lot, which, we're not going to cover all that part of the story today, but there were some issues there. But he didn't know the full plan in detail leaving. And that's what I want to say. When we come into situations, can we trust God and not know the full plan? Not be in control? That's our problem. We're control freaks. Okay, wait, Lord, come on, give me some more details here. I want to write them down before we actually start packing the donkey. Nope. He just packed the donkey and headed out. We're getting in the car today, and you know what? I have the GPS on the whole 1,000 miles. I'm addicted to it. I know where to go. Highway 2. Why not take a right, go north, get the North Portal, up Highway 39 to 1 to 21, and I'm at my hometown. But I got to have the GPS on the whole time. He didn't know a detail other than God said, leave, and here are my promises. Wow. So, he did know that he didn't have a descendant. That's what he did know. He did not have a descendant because he was old, but we're going to believe God anyway. All right. Okay. God fulfills the promise of a son. And notice that there's a name change in the process, and we didn't read it, but God decides to change their names to Abraham and Sarah in chapter 17 there. We're not going to cover that today. All right? God always does what he promises. So, in 21, 1 and 2, which we already read, but I'll read it quickly again for you. Now the Lord was gracious to Sarah. Okay, he says gracious. Now she's 75 years old. Is that really gracious? For her to have a child at 75? Okay, well, gracious to Sarah as he said, as he had promised, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. She became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age at the very time God had promised him. Always wait for God's timing. Okay? Now we know there's some backstory that they didn't quite wait, and that's still a problem today, but we're not covering that today. So God always does what he promises. Okay, and then Abraham names his son Isaac in verse 3 there. Abraham gave the name Isaac to the son Sarah bore him. So, imagine the emotion. At one time, Sarah did laugh. Now, if I said to my wife, we're going to have a kid at 60-ish. I'm not 60 yet, but anyway. We would laugh, right? That's hilarious. That's a real funny joke, honey. Ha, 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 ha. I don't know if it was that kind of a laugh, but she did laugh, okay? But God does what he says. So think of the emotion involved in this. That I'm not going to get into all the biological details, but to suddenly realize she's pregnant at that age? Wow. But imagine the love they felt for their son in such circumstances, okay? Imagine the gratitude given to God, because it was very important that you have a lineage. We don't care about that in our culture a lot of times now. People don't care if they have kids, in general. And I'm just like, oh, I am so blessed to have kids. But anyway, so God fulfills the promise of the son, of that son, giving them that son. But then God tests Abraham, right? So I just love this in 22:1, where God says to him, sometime later, God tested Abraham. Now, the whole testing thing, does God have the right to do whatever he wants? Yes. Does God do everything perfectly? Yes. So don't get all excited about God testing Abraham. He can do whatever he wants. We know it's perfect, right? Don't be blaming God for anything, that he did something wrong. No, God does everything perfectly. He's going to test Abraham. Have at it, Lord. You know what you're doing, okay? So, and he said to Abraham, Abraham, here am I, he replied. I love that. I wish I responded like that every time. The response is built on a foundation of trust in God. The response is built on experience with God. Had God looked after them? Yes. He did what he said. The response is automatic, and the command that's coming, he doesn't even know it yet. But here I am, Lord. What you got? You find that challenging? I do, because I don't find it easy to do that. Okay? Secondly, he gives him the instruction. And again, God doesn't make things complicated. Take your son, your only son, whom you love, and go to the region of Moriah and sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains I will tell you about. Wow, that's impossible. Okay? God even acknowledges the son whom you love. Now, I don't think God was saying it sarcastically that way, but God puts him in an impossible situation. This is God. We find ourselves in impossible situations, and God has a solution. There's a lot of freedom in just saying, I know you got a solution. I'm going to enjoy the peace right now because you're going to show me. Not me fixing it. Okay? God would have to provide a solution once again. Okay? Now, Abraham doesn't hesitate. 2:3. Early in the next morning, Abraham got up, saddled his donkey. He took with him 2 servants and his son Isaac. And when they had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, that's interesting, He set out for the place God had told him about. So, in belief, he prepares by rising early, first of all. He got up. He's not laying in bed saying, I don't want to get on bed and do this thing today. Nope. Up and at him. In belief, Abraham prepares transportation. Okay? In belief, he prepares the traveling party. In belief, he prepares the wood and sets off. Okay? So Abraham believes God. They traveled for 3 days, it tells us in verse 4 there. Okay? On the third day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. Now, I kind of wondered, what did they talk about for 3 days? We're driving 2 days. What are we going to talk about, honey? Okay? Well, there was a huge elephant in the room, right? Now, it's apparent Isaac doesn't know what the sacrifice is going to be, and I would assume the 2 traveling companions didn't either. But it's right in the front of Abraham's thinking. So what did they talk about? Oh, sports scores or whatever. No, of course, they didn't talk about sports scores. I just think that's really interesting. They had 3 days to talk about maybe nothing. I don't know. But they all knew that the wood was for an offering, which would tell me they all knew we don't have a lamb with us or a sheep or whatever. Okay? Whatever they talked about, it didn't deter Abraham from believing what God had said and acting upon it. Now, in 22:5, it says that he left the young men. Abraham wanted no interference with what was about to happen. Because you realize, as we know the story, because we can read ahead, if he had taken those 2 with him, do you think they would have interfered when Abraham's like this? I kind of wonder. Yeah. So he says, you guys wait here. And Abraham left the donkey, not necessarily no escape from what was about to happen, but that's his transportation part of it, right? So he left that there, and Abraham in faith, excuse me, assures the young men that they would return, that not he would return, that they would return. That's faith, folks. Believing what God has said and acting upon it. All right. Then Isaac asks the $1 million question. I'm going to read this here. Isaac spoke up and said to his father, hey, Dad, Father, yes, my son, the fire and the wood are here, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? Finally asked the $1 million question, because apparently he did not know the answer at this point. Abraham states that God will provide himself the lamb. Now, there's an interesting language thing going on here. And it could be that he said, God will provide himself as the lamb. Okay? But Abraham proceeds to lead his son to the sacrifice. Yes, death. Abraham believed God would provide and continued to obey. So he believes and continues to obey. In verse 9 there, when they reached the place that God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. And he bound his son and laid him on the altar, on top of the altar, on top of the wood. Okay? Again, takes time to build the altar. So he builds it with Isaac, I'm sure, helping him. Abraham laid the wood in order on the altar. He knew what to do. Okay? And then he bound his son and laid him on the altar. Now Isaac knows what's going to happen. Is there a struggle? It doesn't appear that there is. So he lays him on the altar. Okay? But God provides the solution, and it's in the ram. So Abraham is in motion, but the angel speaks in verse 10 there. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called out to Abraham from heaven, Abraham, Abraham, here I am. Says it again. If there was a conflict in Abraham's heart, the belief he had won over it. Abraham's heart and mind were tied to God's word. Who was tied on the altar? His son. What else was tied? His heart and his mind to the word of God. Beautiful. And that equals obedience. But Abraham responds to the angel in the same way as back in 22:1. Here I am. Okay? So, the command is not to lay a hand on the boy, as we can read in 12 there. The angel defines the depths of Abraham's trust. It's a beautiful thing. And the angel could see that Abraham's faith because of his action. Then Abraham lifts his eyes in faith again. So he's looking down at his son, ready to kill him, but then he looks up. And what does God do? Yes. He took the ram, bound it, and put it on the altar. Abraham believed God and sacrificed the ram in his son's place. The perfect substitute, caught by the horns so that none of its body was damaged. It was perfect. Okay? So, why should this story be important to you? Take these with you. You are no different than Isaac or Noah or Abel or Adam. You've got a problem, and only God has a solution for it. Now, many of us here know what that solution is, and it's beautiful. But if you don't have a lamb, we can help you with that. If God doesn't provide a substitute for you, you pay with your life. There's no other option. Because only God can provide the perfect substitute. So what are you trusting in as a substitute? Nobody else can take your place as a substitute because nobody else is good enough, right? And what action will your belief produce? Good questions to ask. And even though I'll be on vacation, I might be asking again on Wednesday. Okay? So, beautiful story, the perfect substitute. And of course, we could dive in and talk about so much more in there, but take these away and see how God will teach your heart in them. All right, let's pray. Lord, thank you again for your mercy, because you have not given us what we deserve. Thank you for your grace, because you've given us what we don't deserve. The truth was, if God said Isaac had to die, he had to die. But in your grace, you provided a perfect substitute to take his place. And I thank you, Jesus, that that is you. So we can rest in that perfect substitute. And I pray in your beautiful name.